It is now my pleasure to introduce our commencement speaker and honorary degree recipient, Mr. Ron Chernow. Mr. Chernow's path to the stage is a very interesting one for a variety of reasons. He is an honors graduate of Yale and Cambridge, where he majored in English literature. Today, Ron Chernow is one of the most distinguished commentators on history, politics, and business in America. Interestingly, much of his success comes not just from his formal training in English literature, but also through his steadfast commitment to becoming a self-taught historian. His efforts have borne amazing fruit. He has won virtually every major prize in American letters. The Washington Post has cited him as one of the 5 most important public intellectuals in America today. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch has hailed him as one of the preeminent biographers of his generation, while Foreign Affairs magazine termed him one of the finest biographical writers in American history. Fortune dubbed him America's best business biographer. In September 2017, President Obama conferred upon him a National Humanities Medal at the White House. Mr. Chernow's first book, The House of Morgan, won the National Book Award as the best nonfiction book of 1990. His second book, The Warburgs, won the prestigious George S. Eccles Prize for the best business book of 1993 and was cited by the American Library Association as one of the year's 10 best works. His 1998 biography of John D. Rockefeller, entitled Titan, was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award for biography and remained on the New York Times bestseller list for 16 weeks. Mr. Chernow's much anticipated biography of Alexander Hamilton was published in April 2004 to extraordinary acclaim. The New York Times praised it as moving and masterly, by far the best biography ever written about the man, while USA Today hailed it as a must-read, Ron Chernow's masterpiece. The New York Review of Books called it a great biography. Excerpted by Businessweek and chosen as the main selection of the Book of the Month Club and the History Book Club, the book spent 3 months on the New York Times bestseller list and was the first recipient of the George Washington Book Prize for the year's best book about the founding era. It was nominated for a National Book Critics Circle Award in biography. In October 2010, Mr. Chernow's long-awaited biography of George Washington, Washington, A Life, appeared to outstanding reviews. It was the main selection of the Book of the Month Club as well as the History and Military Book Clubs. Writing in the New York Review of Books, Gordon Wood praised it as the best, most comprehensive, and most balanced single-volume biography of Washington ever written. The book spent 5 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. In March 2011, the New York Historical Society gave the book its coveted American History Book Prize for the best volume about American history, published in 2010, endowing Mr. Chernow with the honorary title of American Historian Laureate. In May of that year, Washington, A Life was honored with the Pulitzer Prize in Biography, the highest honor reserved for a writer in the field. Starting in 2008, Mr. Chernow began working with someone you may know, Lin-Manuel Miranda, as the historical consultant on the sensational Broadway musical Hamilton. Inspired by his biography of Alexander Hamilton and considered the biggest Broadway hit of the past 50 years. In May 2015, as a member of the show's creative team, he received the Lucille Lortel Award for Outstanding Musical, the first time he had ever received a theater award. The show was nominated for a record-breaking 16 Tony Awards, winning 11 of them. In November 2015, Mr. Chernow and Mr. Miranda jointly received the History Makers Award of the New York Historical Society for their work together on the acclaimed show, and were also honored at the National Archives in Washington. In October 2017, the Penguin Press published Mr. Chernow's 7th book, Grant, to universal praise. Writing in the New York Times Book Review, President Bill Clinton said, "This is a good time for Ron Chernow's fine biography of Ulysses S. Grant to appear." In the Daily Times, Janet Maslin observed, "Books of its caliber by writers of Chernow's stature are rare, and this one qualifies as a major event." In The Atlantic, Ta-Nehisi Coates called the biography another classic in the Ron Chernow oeuvre, while George Will observed in the Washington Post that Chernow's Grant is a gift to a nation much in need of measured judgments about its past. After the publication of Grant, Mr. Chernow received the Commonwealth Award for Literature, the Richard Nelson Kern Award of the Lincoln Forum, and the Fletcher Pratt Award of the Civil War Roundtable for the year's best nonfiction book on the Civil War. In May 2018, he became one of only 3 living biographers to receive the Gold Medal in Biography, awarded every 6 years by the American Academy of Arts and Letters, the highest form of artistic recognition in the field. The book debuted at #1 on the New York Times hardcover bestseller list and stayed at or near the top of the list for more than 4 months. Grant was the best-selling nonfiction book of the 2017 holiday season. A frequent contributor to the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, Mr. Chernow is a familiar figure on national radio and television and has appeared in numerous documentaries and has served as the keynote speaker at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He has served as president of PEN American Center, the country's preeminent organization of book authors, has sat on the board of the Society of American Historians and Humanity in Action, a global human rights organization, is a fellow of the New York Academy of History, and is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the Century Association. But perhaps my favorite item in our speaker's accomplished biography is the fact that on 3 occasions he has been a clue in the New York Times crossword puzzle, and once was even a clue on Jeopardy! Mr. Chairman, on behalf of New England College community, I present to you Ron Chernow to receive the Doctorate of Humane Letters, honoris causa.
By the authority vested in me by the Board of Trustees of New England College in the General Court of New Hampshire, for writer, journalist, and biographer Mr. Ron Chernow, for your literary contributions and honors, including the 2011 Pulitzer Prize for Biography and American History Book Prize for Washington, A Life, contribution to a better understanding of American history through your other works, including The House of Morgans, An American Banking Dynasty and the Rise of Modern Finance, John D. Rockefeller, and the popular Alexander Hamilton. Exemplary achievement in contributing to Lin-Manuel Miranda's creation, Hamilton the Musical. This last achievement generated interest and access to American founding through the lens of Alexander Hamilton. I confer upon you, Ronald Chernow, the degree of Doctor of Humane Letters, honoris causa, with all the rights, privileges, and responsibilities thereunto pertaining, cause you to be vested with the hood of that degree, and provide you in witness thereof this diploma.
Thank you so much for those generous words. President Lesperance, esteemed faculty and colleagues, and of course, the great class of 2023. I can't tell you what a thrill it is for me to share in this great milestone in your life. I also want to salute all the parents and grandparents who are here today, who also did a lot of the heavy lifting these last 4 years. And today they know for certain that their sacrifice was not in vain. You made it, so congratulations. You know, ever since I got mixed up with a certain musical, I always worry that audiences will expect me to come out snapping my fingers and maybe singing in rhyme couplets or executing a little Michael Jackson moonwalk across the stage. Now, I may rap today if the mood takes me, but I'm supposed to, as your graduation speaker, I'm supposed to pump some last-minute advice into your heads before you leave these hallowed halls. I thought I would talk about Alexander Hamilton, both the man and the musical, because I think that there are certain lessons to be learned from both. But my big theme today, and please make a note, is to expect in your life the unexpected. Beware of the power of chance. I dare say that many of you are sitting here today with very precise fantasies of what you would like your future life to be. You have at least some vague sketch, some rough blueprint rattling around in your mind. And indeed, you know, for a small handful of you, you will have exactly the lives that you picture here today. But it's my sad task to tell you, and I'm sorry to be the one to break the bad news, that for many of you, your lives will bear little or no resemblance, perhaps, to what you're imagining today. But the good news, and it is very good news, is that the life that you will end up having may be much richer and more fascinating and rewarding than the one that you're picturing today. Okay, let's take a look at Alexander Hamilton's life. If You think you had a uniquely awful childhood? Of course, we all think we had the worst childhood of all time. Well, try on Hamilton's childhood for size. He was an illegitimate boy born on the Caribbean island of Nevis, and he spent his adolescence on St. Croix. And he suffered through a series of childhood traumas that would have crushed a lesser individual. His biological father abandoned the family when Alex was 11. His mother died of island fever when he was 13. And then he was farmed out to a first cousin who committed suicide. It didn't exactly look like a promising life. In fact, it looked like a fairly desperate and doomed one. But fate had funny things in store for our Hamilton, who was then an impoverished teenage clerk at a trading house in St. Croix. Well, a monster hurricane lashed the island, and this self-taught prodigy sat down, and he wrote a description of it for the local paper of such precocious force that the local merchants suddenly recognized this prodigy in their midst, and they banded together to educate him in North America. He went to King's College, later renamed Columbia. And while Hamilton was there, he wrote stirring pamphlets against the British. He delivered spellbinding speeches in City Hall Park in New York, and pretty soon, as you know, he was aide-de-camp to George Washington and off and running on his way to becoming the first Treasury Secretary, while only in his 30s. See, Hamilton meshed with his historical moment. He seized opportunities that he could never have envisioned when he was a teenager. He took chances, and he never looked back. Fate beckoned, and our Hamilton boldly followed. Now, when I tell you to expect the unexpected in your life and even embrace it, you may well be wondering, well, how is this guy such a big authority on the subject? Well, it's partly that there's a certain omniscience granted to every graduation speaker for a limited 24-year period. It then disappears afterwards. But I'm in the period right now. But I also know these things from my own life. You see, I did 2 degrees in English literature at fancy schools. And in my innocence, I imagined that I was on my way to a career as a novelist and literary critic. You will be surprised to learn that I did not take a single history course in college. Why? Because I was always taking a course in the novel. Those courses had gigantic reading lists. And I didn't see how I could simultaneously take a history course, which also would have a gigantic reading list. So I didn't take a history course. Perfect education, perfect training for a future historian, eh? Anyway, I must say, I was a pretty dreamy, idealistic kid, and looking back, I don't think I gave a hard 5 minutes thought to how I was going to support myself. In fact, I think that I was every parent's nightmare. I was highly educated and totally unemployable. No one would have touched me with a 10-foot pole. So as I moved back in with my parents, who had a little apartment in Lower Manhattan, I had a serious panic attack as I contemplated the dread subject of money and how to earn it. Money for me at that age was a foreign country that I had not yet visited. Now, one of my former English professors, trying to help me out, suggested that I sell ideas to magazines. And so the next day, I woke up and I sent what I thought was an interesting idea to the editor of New York Magazine. And I was just hoping that they would take that idea and assign it to one of their staff writers, and I might get a $50 or $100 check. I should explain, my father owned a small discount store in Chinatown in New York. It was just a little mom and pop operation. But he was coming home every night sick with worry and telling us over dinner that there were these youth gangs in Chinatown that were terrorizing the neighborhood. That they would come into your store. They were running a Chicago-style protection racket. They would come into your store. They would ask you for $300 or $400 a month. And if you didn't pay to them, they would start chucking bricks through your window and making your life miserable. Now, none of the Anglos outside of Chinatown knew that this was going on. I knew about it because I was getting this story over the dinner table. Well, anyway, I'd sent this letter off, and to my astonishment, a week later, the managing editor of New York Magazine called me up and asked me to write this article about crime and corruption in New York's Chinatown. And I thought to myself, oh my God, he's making this terrible mistake. He imagined that because I sent him this letter that I was proposing myself as the author of the article. But I was sitting there, at the time the phone rang, I was sitting there feeling pretty miserable, having no idea what I was going to do with my life and feeling I had really made a pretty good mess of it already. So I thought to myself, what the hell? Why not give it a shot? And I should say, at that time in my life, having done these two fancy literature degrees, I was a real literary snob and I looked down on journalists. But as soon as I got this call, I thought that journalists were the most wonderful people in the world. Well, I spent 3 weeks writing the article, and it ended up as an 8-page cover story in the magazine. I documented not only the protection racket that my father told me about, but I discovered that these gangs were kidnapping Chinese children and were forcing the parents to pay $3,000–$4,000 a piece for every child to ransom them back. These were kind of poor immigrant families. That accident of this editor calling me up and asking me to write it, that just fatal, blessed, crazy accident, alerted me to something really important, that I was meant to write nonfiction, not fiction. This had not occurred to me before. It took that power of chance, that accident. So everything that I have written about in my adult life has been self-taught. I teach myself, then I teach you, the reader. A friend of mine recently joked that I had created my own Ron Chernow University, where I was the sole professor and the American public was my classroom. Okay, let me fast forward 40 years to another moment when fate, power of chance, steered me in a completely unexpected direction. My Hamilton biography had appeared in 2004. I thought that it might be a feature film or a TV series. And instead, I learned that from a mutual friend that a hip-hop guy named Lin-Manuel Miranda had read my book and had become obsessed with it. This was a startling piece of news. The friend put me in touch with Lin, and Lin invited me to a matinee of his first musical, which was called In the Heights. He also wrote that and also starred in it. After the performance, I went backstage, and luckily I was able to tell Lin with a straight face how much I had enjoyed the show and his performance. And then I said to him, Lin, so I gather that my Hamilton book made a big impression on you. And he said, Ron, as I was reading it on vacation in Mexico, hip-hop songs started rising off the page. And I said to him, really? This was not like a typical reaction to one of my books. And then he said to me in this very, very earnest voice, he said, Ron, Hamilton's life was a classic hip-hop narrative. And I was thinking to myself, pal, I have no idea what you're talking about, here. This is the most unexpected conversation I'd ever had. I guess that a more sober historian might have turned, and ran at that point. This seemed like one seriously crazy dude, this Lin-Manuel guy. But I had learned in life, going back to that Chinatown experience, that opportunities you will find sometimes present themselves in very strange and unexpected forms. Also, I was a lifelong theater goer, been going to theater since I was in my teens, 20s, and I had always wondered what life would be like on the other side of the footlights. So Lin asked me on the spot to become the historical advisor to this as yet completely non-existent show. So I laughed and said to him, you mean you want me to tell you when something is wrong? And he said, very emphatically, he said, yes, I want the historians to take this seriously. Now, at this point, I had to confess to Lin that he was talking to a world-class ignoramus when it came to hip-hop. I admitted it to him frankly. He said, okay, I'm going to educate you in hip-hop, which he proceeded to do on the spot. He taught me that hip-hop has rhymed endings, it has internal rhyme, it has wordplay, and gave me these pointers, and I started to more or less get the hang of it. So we were suddenly off and running on what turned out to be a 7-year journey to Broadway. Now, during those 7 years, I can't stress this enough, every single person I told about this musical thought that the idea of a hip-hop musical about Alexander Hamilton was the single silliest idea they had ever heard of. And I think if I had been them, I would have had exactly the same reaction. I mean, this just sounded like seriously crazy stuff, and people would give me these pitying looks. Sometimes people would say to me, would you expect anyone to come and see it? And I could see that almost all of my close friends and relatives thought I was completely off my rocker. But I knew better. I knew better because a few months after I met Mr. Miranda, he came over to my house one day, and he sat down on my couch, and he started snapping his fingers, and this is what he sang. There's a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by Providence impoverished and squalor, grew up to be a hero and a scholar. The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by working a lot harder, by being a lot smarter. By 14, they placed him in charge of a trading charter. And every day while slaves were being slaughtered and carted away across the waves, he struggled and kept his guard up. Inside, he was longing for something to be a part of. The brother was ready to beg, steal, borrow, or barter. Then a hurricane came and devastation reigned. Our man saw his future dripping down the drain. Put a pencil to his temple, connected it to his brain, and he wrote his first refrain, a testament to his pain. Well, the word got around. They said, this kid is insane, man. Took up a collection just to send him to the mainland. Get your education, don't forget from whence you came. And the world's gonna know your name. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton. I have a terrible voice. My name is Alexander Hamilton, and there's a million things I haven't done. But just you wait. Just you wait. When he was 10, his father split, full of it, dead-ridden. 2 years later, see Alex and his mother bedridden, half dead, sitting in their own sick, the fence and thick. Alex got better, but his mother went quick. Moved in with a cousin. The cousin committed suicide, left him with nothing but ruined pride, something new inside, a voice saying, Alex, you gotta fend for yourself. He started retreating and reading every treatise on the shelf. There would have been nothing left to do for someone less astute. He would have been dead or destitute without a cent of restitution. Started working, clerking for his late mother's landlord, trading sugar cane and rum and all the things he can afford, scamming for every book he can get his hands on, planning for the future. See him now as he stands on the bow of a ship headed for a new land. In New York, you can be a new man. In New York, you can be a new man. I'm a New Yorker. In New York, you can be a new man. In New York, you can be a new man. New York, New York, just you wait. Alexander Hamilton, we are waiting in the wings for you. You could never back down. You never learned to take your time. Oh, Alexander Hamilton, when America sings for you, will they know what you overcame? Will they know you rewrote the game? The world will never be the same. Oh, the ship is in the harbor now. See if you can spot him. Another immigrant coming up from the bottom. His enemies destroyed his rep. America forgot him. Me, I fought with him. Me, I died for him. Me, I trusted him. Me, I loved him. And me, I'm the damn fool that shot him. There's a million things I haven't done, but just you wait. What's your name, man? Alexander Hamilton. Thank you. Congratulations.